Hello, Blenders, and welcome to episode number 115 of ReelBlend, a podcast that knows this steak doesn't exist. But after 9 years, do you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss. That's a reference that most people will probably get, and it has to do with an amazing story that you're going to hear later in this week's episode because Joey Pantoliano, the great Joey Pants, is joining the ReelBlend podcast to talk about not just the Bad Boys franchise, but his amazing steak scene from The Matrix. And for that, I have to thank Kevin McCarthy of Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. Kevin, hi. How are you doing today?
Hi. I honestly was just thinking about how fun that was to get his answer on that, because I rewatched the scene right after it, and you're going to hear it in the interview, but Sean brings up a very fun moment we had with Joe Pantoliano. We've been doing all these interviews, and it's crazy to talk to these people in their homes, and we'll get into it later on, but Sean brings up a really funny moment. So
he was fantastic. Joining us as well, Jake Hamilton of Fox 32 in Chicago. Hello, Jakey. How are you?
Hey, handsome. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm Sean O'Connell, the managing director of CinemaBlend. You guys should know that by now. Later on in the episode, we're going to have not only the interview with Joey Pants, we're going to talk about the new film Extraction that is hitting Netflix and stars Chris Hemsworth and is brought to us by two guys you might know from previous works that they've done before, like Community on NBC.
Or You, Me, and Dupree. That was a really big film for them.
It was.
Huge. Yeah.
I just wish that they would catch a break.
I know.
Yeah.
Listen, every once in a while, the light shines on the underdog. And maybe Joe and Anthony Russo will make a movie that some of you guys see. So
maybe Extraction's just the cherry on top. You know what I mean?
It might just be. That could be their end game, Kevin. To ultimately get people to see
I wish
Cherry.
I could snap and you guys would disappear.
I just don't want those two guys, since they're brothers, to ever end up in a civil war together. You know what I mean? You just do not want that to happen.
Because it would last forever. They may call it an Infinity War.
Or if it lasts forever and then some, it could enter into the winter. And they could become soldiers.
Oh my God, I don't know which half of you I want to disappear most right now.
Well, I want to give everybody a reminder that we have a community page over on our Facebook.
Community page?
God damn. Can we start over?
Jinx.
There's always a bunch of conversations going on over there that are triggered by the blenders, including polls, and especially with everybody in quarantine, they're figuring out some really interesting topics to go back on, catching up on movies that they're recommending to each other. It's a lot of fun. So if you want to continue the experience of the ReelBlend show, head over to the ReelBlend podcast community on Facebook. We are also posting episodes on our YouTube page. As you can see, we are video streaming, not live, but Gabe is cutting these up after the fact and then putting them up after the episodes go live. But you can find some of the bonus episodes that we've been doing, because the guys mentioned that we've been doing a lot of interviews in the in-between. It feels like we're working... Not that we're working harder necessarily, but we've had a lot of opportunities because talent has been available. So recently we've had Alicia Silverstone come on and talk about Clueless. We've had, I'm blanking on people, Michael Shannon came on to talk about his movie that has recently come out. Barry Sonnenfeld came on and talked about his amazing book. And we have a couple other interesting people to tease too. So bookmark the YouTube page and then follow along if you prefer to watch us as opposed to listen to us.
Yeah, and if you're just finding us, I mean, that's the crazy part about it, is we've been doing this show now for 2 years. And it's funny because we talk to the audience, because we have so many listeners who've been listening to us for a long time. But if you are just tuning in, definitely find us on ReelBlend on iTunes. Go back, find all the big interviews. Obviously, Sean just mentioned Barry Sonnenfeld. We've had everybody from Quentin Tarantino to Sam Mendes. And anybody listening to the show is like, oh, of course, Kevin, we already know that already. But, you never know. We might get new viewers or listeners every single week. So tune in, find out more of our interviews on Apple, on iTunes, Spotify, I believe, as well. So
this is a very special message that I want to send out to the Blender community, but to everyone who's listening to the show or watching the show on YouTube. We know that you guys have been asking us for merchandise, and in the current world of uncertainty, we really wanted to find a way for us to, as a community, do something good, to do something special. So we've created a very special ReelBlend t-shirt that is now available, and we want to make this announcement as part of this show. All proceeds, everything that we earn from this show is going right to the Will Rogers Pioneers Assistance Fund, which is set up to help theater and film exhibition workers who are currently in need. Obviously, the theater-going experience, as you guys know, is crucial to this show. I mean, the thing that brought the three of us together was our love of going to the theater, talking about films. It's the reason that ReelBlend exists. We understand that we think it's a big part of the reason why you guys listen to the show. So we thought this was a great way for us to give back to something that all of us cherish. There are going to be links to this new design. I can't wait to show you guys what the design of the t-shirt looks like. People at CinemaBlend's parent company, Gateway, worked hard on the design. It turned out really, really cool. And so links are going to be, if you're listening to it on a podcast, they'll be in the show notes for this particular episode. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, go down into the description. We'll have a link to the shirt going to that. Again, I can't emphasize enough that we're not earning a single thing off of this. All of the proceeds going to Will Rogers Pioneers Assistance Fund, which is set up to help people who work in theaters. But it's a limited campaign. That's the important thing about it, is we want to make this shirt something special, something that stood out, so that when people see you wearing it, they know that you did it as part of this charitable fund that we set up to help Will Rogers. So it's going to last until Friday, May 8th. So follow the link. You can, if you want to, also make an additional donation. The cost of the shirt, so a portion of the shirt will go to the service that prints the shirt, and then the rest, everything else, goes right to Will Rogers. If in particular you wanted to donate a little bit extra to Will Rogers, I would just kind of recommend going to the Will Rogers Pioneers Assistance Fund page, because if you happen to make it while you're purchasing the shirt, I just want to be upfront that the company that is printing the shirt also takes a little bit of a portion of those proceeds, and we want to obviously get as much money into the Will Rogers Foundation as we can. So really excited about it. What do you guys think about the design of the shirt?
And what I love about it is, and this is just this is a completely genuine response, I want to buy one, and I'm gonna buy one. I'm gonna buy multiple, probably for my wife Lauren, obviously for my parents and my brother. I love the design of it, and the cool thing about it, as Sean said, is it is completely all going towards the Will Rogers, obviously with that process he just explained with Bonfire. And to me, it's cool because I've been doing this. So Lauren and I have actually been buying a lot of t-shirts and sweatshirts from people who are doing the exact same thing. And it's actually a really nice thing to know that you can get something cool, but at the end of the day, that money's going towards someone to help them. And obviously with movie theaters being closed down, one of the things that I've really found interesting about the beginning of all of this was, at the beginning, I felt like there were a lot of people who thought, the idea of movies were trivial, and the sense of, we didn't think about the people who were working on the front lines of the production, but also the front lines at the movie theaters. Now I say front lines because those are the people that are serving you your popcorn and your concessions and taking your ticket. They're editing your movies. They're promoting your films, the publicity teams. There are so many people who are tied to one single release of a movie. We just did an interview today, and we dealt with 3 publicists alone to get one interview done. Yeah. And so you think about all these people who are involved in film, and how we're all adapting right now. And that's why we're doing this. We're doing it because we want to give our audience a shirt, but we're really doing it because we want to support the movie theaters and the people who work in the industry. It's a very important thing to us. We are a very theatrically driven show, as Sean has said multiple times, and I feel like this is a very important thing. I mean, we really, at the end of the day, we want to get money to the right people so that we can continue to go back to that normalcy that we all love and know.
And honestly, I know this isn't what it's about, because it didn't really matter what the shirt looked like. I was going to buy a couple of them anyway because it's a great cause. But it looks so cool. When Gabe sent us what the shirt was going to look like, I got to be honest. I have a drawer full of shirts that have been produced for a good cause, and I bought them happily and thought it's an amazing cause. Give me that shirt. I'll buy a couple. But they're not necessarily the most stylish. They're not something I'm really gonna throw on to I will actively wear this shirt.
Right.
I think it looks that cool. And all the better that, of course, that the funds are going to a great cause. But it helps that the shirt looks really cool too.
It's awesome. And we went back and forth a lot on the design. And for people out there, the behind the scenes of this show is very interesting, because Gabe is, we're always working on different things and different interviews, and that design that you're eventually going to see is actually 3, 4, or 5 steps away from the original design. It's actually kind of cool how we kind of came up with it in that regard, and we'll get into more detail on that. But definitely, as Sean said, check the show notes, check the show descriptions. We will also obviously drop a link on our ReelBlend account and also our own personal Twitter's accounts and CinemaBlend. And I know Gabe was talking about possibly getting links on the CinemaBlend website as well. So there's a lot of different ways we're gonna be putting this out there. Yeah. But again, as Sean said, this is for a good cause. We do not make a single dime personally off of this at all. Neither does CinemaBlend. It all is going to charity through that Bonfire process.
And it'll be limited. So just remember, you have until May 8th, but we'll have plenty of opportunities to remind you guys on the show and on social media as well, too. And if you want to give one to the hosts as a gift, I want to remind you that Jake wears a boy's size large.
True.
So,
That's exactly right.
That's true.
So write that down.
I'm definitely
really,
buying.
really
I'm definitely getting a couple because like, I don't know if you guys saw the Arnold ones. Arnold put out these shirts like called "Stay Your Ass at Home" or something like that. And
that's cool.
I bought a huge hoodie with that on it. And the beauty of it is, it's something that I actually want to wear because I love Arnold. And I also feel like it's great because the money's going towards charity. Like everything, the sweatshirt I'm wearing right now went to completely.
What
to
does
charity.
that say on it?
It's Lauren,
Favored nations.
Yeah, favored nations. Oh, I mean, I'm not. This is not a plug. I'm not being paid by them or anything like that. But Lauren is a fan of.
I asked. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But Lauren is a fan of To All the Boys I Loved Before, and the star of that movie, Noah Centineo, who's I guess she calls him the internet's boyfriend. He's he's kind of a big deal. He has a lot of followers on Instagram, so he put together this company and these shirts, and everything that I'm wearing right now has gone to charity. We bought 2 of them. I bought the Arnold ones. I'll buy 5 ReelBlend ones. So it's great that you can get something for it, but know it goes somewhere good,
I will see this Noah Santinagro, whoever, and raise you one Timothy Chalamet for this internet's boyfriend.
I'll tell you right. All right. So what's interesting about that is I would argue that Chalamet is definitely up there, but Noah had that like that high school drama he put out. So To All the Boys kind of hit that certain audience. I don't know if Timothy's really hit that like high school audience yet. Has he? I feel like he. Do you think he has an older fan
I feel
base?
like the difference between Timothy and Noah is that I know who Timothy is.
Timothy's a better actor. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't know much about Noah. I mean, he's like a a teenage. No, he's a teenager, but he's in these like high school drama type movies. But Timothy's obviously has shown better acting chops.
Just wait till Dune drops, my friend.
Right.
Then we just lost Gabe. There he goes.
We've
rocketed off.
We've discussed this in the show before, but I feel like Timothée Chalamet is the most famous, not famous person I've ever seen. Like he is so well known on the internet, and like when he posts something, his posts are so engaging and so viral. But at the end of the day, I don't think my mom and dad or my grandparents know who Timothée Chalamet is. He
is the snakes on a plane of celebrities, like really big on the internet.
Right.
And then no one knows who he is outside of that.
Like Timothée Chalamet could walk through like Tyson's Corner Mall where I live, and I don't think he would get stopped.
Probably not, no.
But also, it's funny, there's a lot of big actors that also I feel like fit into that. I think Matt Damon could walk through the mall with a hat on and not get... I feel like there's certain ones that can kind of go under low key. I really do.
I'm going to make this a poll, but I didn't make it last week's poll, so we have one that we have to get to. We asked you guys last week if you could have lived during a different decade just to watch the films of that decade on the big screen. And so this sort of ties into us lobbying very hard for the theatrical experience to come back.
No, this came from a text conversation that we were having.
It did. Yeah, it did. We were having a text conversation about which movie were you asking, the 80s?
Yeah, because I was having a flashback. I was doing like some 80s monster movies, and then I'd watched John Landis's American Werewolf in London, which just a fucking masterpiece. Rick Baker, the very first Best Makeup Oscar. And it just got me thinking, like, how great some of these 80s monster movies would have been to see in theaters. And then the snowball started rolling of, like, all the other 80s movies that would have been great to see. And I was like, oh, my God, I wish I could have lived in the theater in the 80s. And then that's when I texted you guys, like, what decade do you wish you would have lived in? And I kept going back to a couple of other ones, but I got to go back to, because so many of my favorite films came out in the 80s. But you lived through the 80s, and then you're like, oh, it's not that great.
It was fine.
Fine? You saw Raiders. You saw 2 of the original Star Wars films. You saw E.T.
Sure.
You saw Back to the Future.
All of those films.
Sean saw Gone with the Wind premiere.
I did.
That's how long
I did the junket.
You and Patrick Stoner.
Me and Patrick Stoner sitting in folding chairs outside of a room.
Remember that time Sean got a double slot with Orson Welles for Citizen Kane? That was amazing. They shot it on 16mm film.
And it was like all the junket people at the time, like, hey, can I go ahead of you? I got a carriage. My carriage leaves in 30 minutes.
And I said, Mr. Wells, this is going to come out a month after the movie's opened. So can I ask you about Rosebud?
Did you ask him his favorite character directed by Christopher Nolan? Citizen Bane? You should have. Why didn't you bring that up, man? How could you not bring that up to him?
So anyway, back to the poll. The 80s dominated this poll. And I'm actually surprised. The 80s dominated with 48% of the vote. And the reason why I say like it was fine is because for every one that you guys just mentioned, there was a wave of schlock.
But that's probably the case for any decade.
Oh, sure. Of course. 100%. So, so the 80s got 48%. The 70s got 28%. The 50s got 15%. And then the 60s got 7.8%, which I'm surprised at. But I'll give you, here's an example from the 80s of a movie I revisited for an anniversary called Just One of the Guys. Just One of the Guys turns 35 this year, and it's coming out on Blu-ray. And we're doing a lot of retrospective interviews on CinemaBlend. Have either of you two even heard of Just One of the Guys?
No.
Classic 80s teen sex comedy. Came in the wave of films after Fast Time at Ridgemont High. And you could not make that movie today. Like so a girl at a high school is on the newspaper. There's two people who are getting a scholarship to go work for the newspaper in their town. And two boys get chosen. And she thinks that she's a better writer than they are. So to prove the point that they got picked because they were guys, she cuts her hair and hides her body and goes to a rival high school to join the newspaper and submit her essay through the whole thing. Now all of that is preposterous, right?
So never been kissed, but earlier
or
on.
She's the Man.
Yes, yeah, or She's the Man, exactly.
Or Mulan.
But dude, you know how we talk about movies that are time capsules of certain generations that you just like every joke in this movie is so over the top, sexist and misogynistic. It is, and I can, in terms of comedy, I can take a lot of stuff as like a pass and just be like, oh, that was the 80s. This one is so far over the top that I'm stunned it even worked for back then.
Sean, you should go back and watch Superbad now.
Oh, really?
It'll blow your mind.
Really? Like, Superbad feels like a 70s, 80s comedy that just so happened to come out like this millennium.
Superbad has dialogue in it, and it's weird. And this is actually maybe a discussion we could have another time because it is a very fascinating discussion about movies that would not be made today. And we discussed this before, like Tropic Thunder would have a hard time probably coming out, and things like that. Even though Robert Downey's character is making fun of that aspect of it, but it's interesting to me to think about Superbad kind of in the same way you're talking about it now. The dialogue in that film, I just can't imagine that coming out today. And it's funny because when I watched mid-90s, which I want to recommend if people haven't seen it, which is a Jonah Hill's directed film about skateboarders. It's incredible. But the dialogue they use in that film is very similar to the style of dialogue Superbad uses. It's just a bunch of kids talking and saying things. But I wonder if, did he get away with it in mid-90s because it was called mid-90s? And that would just time-stamped the dialogue? Because we've had a lot of discussions on the show about like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and did Tarantino hold back at all with the current state that we're in? Like, did he not put certain lines of dialogue in? So I'd be interested in talking to a filmmaker at some point as like a retrospective element. This idea of, could you imagine making that film today, and would you actually adjust it? Like, would Tarantino not?
Yeah, do you worry about? I mean, but even like when you think about like Spielberg and E.T., where he like temporarily went back and erased all of the guns out of it, and then went back and said like, no, that was a mistake. Like, the movie was meant to be what the movie was. But like, it's interesting how time has made even like the most masterful of filmmakers go back and go, ugh.
Yeah, I don't think Tarantino would be able to do the Jimmy scene in Pulp Fiction today. It just would not happen. And I feel like, but it's interesting because when you go back and watch Pulp Fiction, it works in the context of the story. I mean, the world we're living in with these bad people, it makes sense. But obviously, Quentin Tarantino saying those words would not happen. So to your point, Sean, that 80s time capsule, I think we should get into a larger discussion later on about that idea. Maybe make a list of certain films and scenes that would just never happen today. Because I feel like it's fascinating to look down that path. I mean, I'm telling you right now, Superbad, put that on. First 20 minutes.
There's and I know we get a wrap. There's a scene in The Office. Kevin, you've been watching The Office. There's a whole plot line that I don't think you've gotten to yet because it's season 3. But there's a whole plot line that was on network television in like the early 2000s. And every time I watch it, I just go like, there's no way.
It's crazy.
There's no way that would be even acceptable. Like, even if that were like on HBO, you'd sort of cringe and go, ugh. And it was on network television.
Yeah.
I'd say right now, the one word that hits me, and I'm not going to obviously say the word, but the word that strikes me the most when I hear it in a movie now is the F word.
Yeah.
I won't say what it is.
That's in The Office.
And then
that's what it is?
And then the
Yeah,
R.
it's
and
in
then
The Office.
And then the R word.
Yeah.
Those
are two big ones.
words were used so much in the 90s that it became a normal part of conversation. And I remember kids talking like that in high school. That was like, it was acceptable at that time to speak on that.
I'm trying to think of something that I
it was
just
weird.
watched with Brendan too that used the R word so much.
Right?
And he said, I can't think of what it was, but it was something like relatively normal from our past, a comedy of some sort.
Yeah.
And it's funny, he didn't pick up on it because to him it's an unusual word kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's jarred me. I was just like, boy, they really...
It takes me out
I'm watching
of the movie.
Community for the first time, and if you haven't seen it, like Chevy Chase's character is supposed to be kind of this racist, misogynistic, like out of touch old man.
Yeah.
But even like some of the things he says, like I get that that's who his character is, but even like he says things that like, God, even that feels like
But now every time he
too
says
over the
it,
line.
doesn't somebody follow up? Like
Usually
reversal.
someone does, but it sort of acknowledges what he said.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that those words were said on network television. Like it's just it's pretty shocking to hear. To your point.
Yeah.
So.
I'll pose this question because we're wrapping up. I'm not going to answer it. I'm just going to pose it because I want our listeners to tweet us your thoughts. Should a filmmaker not put certain dialogue in a film based on the times we're living in? Like, for example, if Quentin Tarantino put out Pulp Fiction today, should he be required to remove that scene with Jimmy? Are filmmakers getting to the point where they're writing scripts or dialogue knowing that this is going to be acceptable or not acceptable, or are they just putting stuff out like normal and just hoping it lands? I can't imagine.
I mean, you can't predict how the world is going to change, and you definitely don't want like you can't censor art,
right?
You know, one way or the other.
But that's the problem. Art will eventually be censored. That's what I'm saying. Like, you cannot put out certain movies with certain lines of dialogue anymore, and you cannot write those lines of dialogue anymore with an R word or an F word. And so does that create a problem with the creativity of the script? That's all. I find that to be an interesting discussion.
We will see.
Interesting question.
Yeah, I didn't think that this poll was going to lead us down to such an interesting conversation. A relatively boring
Welcome
poll.
to ReelBlend.
And yet, we found some way to make it really interesting.
Sorry,
so
I find that interesting, sorry.
No, I think that's great. If you had told me at any point over the course of my life that we would get to interview Joe Pantoliano, but not... Now, we had this conversation on the podcast before. When you get an actor and they are promoting the project that you really want to talk to them about... It's that sweet spot where you can finally spend time talking about. So for us, it's Bad Boys.
Dude, mine was walking in, and I feel bad saying this because I know, Jake, you weren't there for this one, but it's the one that I wish you were there for, was walking into Harrison Ford's room at The Force Awakens with the confidence that I could ask him any Star Wars question I wanted to without him getting mad at me. It was like this beautiful thing where like I walk in the room, I look at his face, I'm like, it's Star Wars time, dude. Like, and
it doesn't mean he won't get mad at you, but at least you have a justifiable excuse.
Right. It was like, but Sean brings up a beautiful point. Like when we got the Russos for Endgame,
Jamie Lee Curtis for Halloween,
and we're on that couch with the Russos talking about the ending of Endgame, and just to be there in that spot, like Sean talked about that sweet spot. You know, you could talk about whatever you want. You know, you can ask them whatever you want about it, and there's nothing that should scare you away from it. And that's really, to be honest, that he brings up a great point. That's that sweet spot of interviewing that we rarely find sometimes.
Well, we found it here because Joey Pants is joining us to talk about Bad Boys for Life. His role as Captain Howard in all three Bad Boys films. Obviously, we branched out to talk about his work with Nolan and Memento. We talked about the Matrix films. I mentioned Goonies ever so briefly, and we just got his insights into what's going on with the world of cinema nowadays. So without further ado, the ReelBlend interview with the great Joe Pantoliano.
Well, first of all, congratulations to you. I've been following these Bad Boys films for a long time, and I think at this point in time, I think the world could collectively use a woosah. I think we all definitely need that at this point. And I was, this is a big film, and the third film was such a big surprise for a lot of people. A lot of things happened in this movie that people were shocked by. Obviously, Will Smith's character being shot early on in the film was a big surprise. But I wanted to talk to you about Captain Howard's death, because that character you've been playing playing since 1995. This is a very big character. It's a big part of Bad Boys. What was it like for you emotionally to shoot that scene? And I know you've been playing characters and acting for a long time, but is it kind of a goodbye to the character as you shoot it? Do you remember the day shooting that sequence?
Let me see. Let me think about that. That scene we shot that scene in Miami. Yeah. And so I had other stuff to shoot after we, it wasn't like the last day and that's it, to wrap on Joey. Actually, some of the last stuff we shot, I believe, was Will's character, Mike Lowry, getting shot. On Ocean Avenue. I don't think I was. I feel like I was. I had that really nice scene with Mike Lowry, with Will and I at the basketball court, which I liked because we had a basketball scene in the first one, and even my granddaughters, as written, my granddaughter was the star player, and I said I think it'd be funny if she couldn't shoot hoops like Grandpa. And then
I wish they gave her a cigar, Joe. She could have had a cigar in her mouth while she was shooting.
But so we did that, and then the next day we did that little walk and talk where I'm inviting him to my house for pizza, and then the lights go out. For me, I was fascinated because you have to understand that the technology has gotten so sophisticated. And this was the crew that they had was like the Marvel, A-list crew, special effects, all of those guys. So what they were using, and it's the first time I ever did a hit where you're not using squibs anymore. You're just play acting, and then they CGI it in later. So it was just, I was just fascinated by the whole process. It just kind of blew my mind. It just blew my mind.
Joe, we are enormous fans of this entire franchise. We spend far too much time on our show debating which one we prefer, the first one or the second one. We're divided pretty evenly down the camp. I'm curious, as someone who transitioned from 1 to 2 with Michael Bay, I see a huge difference from where he was in the first one to where he was in part 2. By the time you guys reunited for the second one, which to me, it's longer, it's closer in scale to the type of movies he tends to like to direct. The first one's so streamlined and lean and stripped down. Did you see a difference in Bay when you guys got back together after he had done Pearl Harbor, Armageddon, The Rock, movies like that? Was he a different director, or did you always see that in him on the first one too?
In terms of working with him, he was more, for me, it was more fun to be able to understand him. I mean, I don't think I didn't know him at the beginning. It was his first feature. His style was a little abrupt to me, and he was a yeller. And once I got to know that's how he was, it was I had a little more understanding for him, but he was also, incredibly generous because he gave me the job to begin with. And in terms of what you're describing, I didn't. It was just like back in the saddle again. The same thing with working with Bilal and Adil. First time, big studio picture. They had made 3 impressive films in Brussels, in their home country, Brussels. but not on a scale like this. So, and the script, Bad Boys 3, the script was much tighter. It was on the page. With 1 and 2, there were certain sequences that you knew that didn't need work, and some of them did. But their DP on 3 was just amazing to see how he moved that camera and the technology that supports the kind of moves that you just couldn't do 5 years ago. So for me, it's Bad Boys 3 is the best of the franchise.
Oh, listen to that. That's breaking news right there.
Joe, sorry, this is Jake, and my camera's not working, so you can't see the third guy here. But you have worked with a lot of directors at the beginning of their career. Michael Bay on the first Bad Boys, the Wachowskis on The Matrix, Christopher Nolan for Memento. And I'm sort of curious, whenever you work with masterful directors that early on, do you get a sense that they're about to go on to bigger things? Do you get a feel for, like, I'm working with someone who's about to blow up, or do they still have that novice director energy about them?
Well, when I started with some of those guys, I was a novice myself. Taylor Hackford, I did his first feature. Wow, but Andy Davis is one of his first. We did a horror movie together after he did Stony Island. By the way, you want to see an amazing film about blues, his movie Stony Island that they made for $300,000 in 1978. Take a look at that film; it's stunning. But I've been very fortunate to be picked by first time directors, and I was incredibly impressed with the Wachowskis because they were on another level, and the same thing
Bound.
with Bound, Chris Nolan, and the working relationship that I had with Chris and his wife Emma and Guy, and we shot Memento over 24 days, and we would work Monday through Friday, and then on the weekends they would come to my house, Guy and Emma and Chris, and we would work on all of the scenes that we were going to shoot the following week. So that was priceless. That kind of working relationship and the time frame and the lack of money, the limitations the financial limitations that you're shooting off the page. You're trying to figure it all out so you're not eating up the clock on the day. And I like that. A movie like Bad Boys for Life, where you have all the infrastructure in the world and all the toys and the bells and the whistles. And Bruckheimer was there. So that was, Jerry Bruckheimer doesn't get the credit, that he deserves, because as producers go, he's the best creative producer I've ever worked with, and so he's there, and then he's got his infrastructure, all of the guys that are there with him, that've been with him for forever, and so you feel like you're in great hands, and they let you, do what you do. And this one, Will was a producer on it, and a true, a great guy to work with, but also as a producer, as a boss, incredibly generous to all of us, and he learned from the best, from his days in Fresh Prince. And, I walked into that makeup and hair trailer, and his people are still there. It's like he's been working with these people since Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So I learned a lot about, I learned, humility and pride and work ethic from Will and Martin, that I tried to emulate. And I'm older than those guys are, but but they took it way more serious than I did. I was just like, I had no idea. They knew when they were working on that movie how the opportunity that was in front of them, and they worked really hard but it slipped through their fingers, and I was just dumb luck. I was just there and and I just along for the ride, and it was a great ride, and I was very lucky, and they've been good to me.
Joe, I grew up watching your movies. I think we all did. Everything, you've done so many films that we could all call films that we all grew up on. I remember seeing Matrix for the first time when I was 14 with my father at AMC in Hampton, Virginia. And there are moments in that film that will stick with us forever. And this is a really strange, random thing in that movie that I wanted to ask you about, but it was something that I always noticed. As your character eats that steak, as he's across from Agent Smith and he's making that deal. There are some pretty relatively famous moments in films with food, like, Pulp Fiction with the Big Kahuna Burger. That steak scene in The Matrix is pretty iconic. And I was just, and it might be a random question to ask you, but I was just wondering what you remember about shooting that moment. Were you just eating steaks all day long? What was that? It's a goofy question, but it's something I've kind of wanted to know because the steak looks so appetizing and the character is clearly using that because he goes, you know what? I'm going to sell out my friends and do what I'm going to do.
Well, as far as meat is concerned, I don't eat a lot of steak personally. But when I do, I cook it within an inch of its life. I don't want to see any blood anywhere. It's like, so that those fillets, and there were a lot of them. But I'd worked it out with the prop guy so that when we got into the coverage, he set it up and gave me shiitake mushrooms because it has the same texture as the meat. So when I was like different angles, there's that one shot where I'm holding it on the fork. It's kind of like hanging there.
Yeah, that's the shot I'm talking about. It looks rare, too.
It's rare. It's not rare. It's like, still alive. Yeah. But I had to put it in my mouth. I had to it had to chew it and I had to swallow it. But, as I remember it, the Wachowskis, there was a lot of steak during lunch. I gave it to them. And, but what I remember is that the curiosity, Carrie Ann and Fishburne and Keanu had all asked to come, and it was a night shoot. We were up. We shot that in Sydney, Australia, and this fancy restaurant that's up like on the 50th floor near the Opera House. So why we went up there. Because you don't really get a sense of where you could be anywhere. It's like I don't recall any kind of like POV shot of the skyline.
Yeah, just the inside of the restaurant. Yeah,
it's the inside of a restaurant. But I remember that idea and the frustration, and I always have arguments with fans of that movie. Because they look at Cypher and they say, "Oh, you were a traitor," and I like being years of being in show business and having to dissect and having liberal vision of the character I'm portraying. I'm always arguing on his behalf, on Cypher's behalf, like who wouldn't take that deal? If you were given an opportunity and a choice, and then you decide you made the wrong choice, right? You take the red pill, and the girl that you love is in love with somebody else. You've gone through 6 or 7 ones, right? And Neo's just another guy that's going to get his ass killed, and he's going, I made a terrible mistake. Ignorance is bliss. Why shouldn't I go back to a world and pick the person I want to be, pick the career I want to have and have no memory that I betrayed anybody, that I killed anybody.
I'm just imagining Keanu eating steak with you guys at that restaurant. The whole cast is eating those steaks. Sounding crazy to me.
We actually were in the parking lot, in the underground parking lot is where they set up lunch. That's where we ate lunch.
Joe, speaking of The Matrix, obviously they're shooting, I think it's on pause, but right now they're shooting Matrix 4. And I know initially it might seem like a silly question, would they bring back Cypher? But they're bringing back Neo and Trinity, who both died in the third film. So I'm curious, have they reached out to you about Cypher potentially coming back? And if not, if they did, would you be interested in playing the character again?
I'd be interested. I doubt they're gonna be bringing me back. I've lobbied for it. Believe me.
Have you?
I've sent little notes to Lana and asked her, but to no response. So,
Joe, tell them we need another steak scene. We need a steak scene again in the new Matrix, and you have to be there for it.
Yes, yeah, I'm all for it. Believe me, yes. So the answer is yes and yes.
I am curious about this though, Joe. To sort of bring it back to Bad Boys for Life. Also, a lot of times with these franchises, the fan bases clamor for another story. And as more time passes, realistically, we look at them and we just say, you can't recapture that magic, or you're not able to. But then, new directors come in, they bring their vision, and Bad Boys for Life ends up being a huge hit, but at the same time, you end up having people like a fan base that's clamoring for something like The Goonies to come back after 35 years. Like, what is the secret to...
Now you're talking.
Like, why can't a franchise... How come some can come back and some should be left alone? What's the difference between the two?
Well, I don't think there is a difference. I think if they've got the will and the money to put it together, and they push the bullets, it's high risk, man. It's catching lightning in a bottle. And look at all of these sequels that they make that just fall by the wayside, but they just continue to try to do that. And I think the algorithms know something that we don't know, but you have to deliver, because we as an audience, we've got our sleeves rolled up. We've been waiting 15 years, so they better deliver. Otherwise, we will be brutal. And Bad Boys delivered, and Spades, and it introduced the franchise to a whole new audience. And Martin and Will were at their level best, and we're in love with those guys. As an audience, we just love them, and the writers did them proud. So it was great. It was absolutely great. Believe me, I was shocked it was that good. I was absolutely floored. And we saw it at the premiere, at the Grumman's Theater. And I had my family there. Everybody had all of their families there. It was like working in a factory and getting a gold watch after 25 years of employment. We were there.
It's a good way to look at it.
Joe, I'm going to wrap it up with this. Growing up, I was mentioning I loved your films. I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 14. So I've followed your work in regards to mental illness and the stigma surrounding mental illness. And I really do appreciate everything you've done with it over the years. It's really oddly funny. I've definitely used woosah in real life to actually calm down. I was just curious if you could just speak on real quick about the idea of speaking out about mental health, the stigma surrounding it. And obviously a character like Captain Howard, he is obviously dealing with anxieties as well, and obviously deals with them in his own ways. Do you ever utilize things your characters use in your real life? Have you ever actually done woosah like by yourself?
Well, I'll tell you something. I did a film called No Kidding Me Too, and the United States Army invited me to Iraq during the war to bring the film there because they had a high level of completed suicides. Something like 23 or 4 a day. And their research was telling them was first tour of duty, first deployment within the first 6 months of deployment between the ages of 18 and 21. all Anglo-American males. That's who was completing their suicides. So I was at 5 different bases over 8 or 9 days, and they would do woosah. They would all be yelling, screaming at me, 300, 400, 500 guys and girls out in the audience on these army bases, and they were all screaming, woosah, woosah, and pulling on their ear. So it was fantastic. And the idea, listen, especially now, everybody thinks that the whistle's going to blow in 3 weeks and everybody goes back to work and it's life as usual. And that's just not going to be the case. And the first responders that are going to be traumatized by the emotional havoc that they've been put through, that they've not been trained for. And God forbid we get a second wave of this virus because we just go back to business as usual. But the idea, it always struck me odd when I finally, as a result of the 9/11 trauma, that when 9/11 happened, something occurred inside my psyche that kicked up all of this emotional dust from unresolved childhood traumas that I never dealt with, and then being diagnosed with clinical depression and feeling that relief that it wasn't my fault, that it wasn't a character defect, that there were other people that felt just like I felt, and the idea of sharing that information and being open and talking about it with like-minded individuals, so you feel less alone. I think is a great opportunity for people to understand that we're all in this together, and when I say we, I mean we humans. That globally we've got to work together, because our lives depend on it.
Well, Joe, we love you so much. We're huge fans of your work, your career, and we really do appreciate you taking the time in the midst of all this craziness to come on and talk about something as distracting as movies, because we rely on them, to make us feel empowered and special, and we love all the work that you've done. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you all, gentlemen, and
thank you.
My best regards to you all, and stay safe and keep your distance.
Will do.
Same to you, Joe.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Bye, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Obviously, we want to thank Sony Pictures Home Entertainment and Joe Pantoliano for coming on the ReelBlend podcast. I want to let everybody know that Bad Boys for Life, his latest chapter of the Bad Boys saga, is available now on VOD. Make sure that you guys go and check that out. You've heard us rave about it before. You can also go back and listen to our interview with the co-directors, Bilal and Adil. We talked to them at the beginning of the year, right when that movie was coming out. They're a lot of fun to talk to. We have talking points, a lot of news. We're going to go over some of the delays and announcements, and we're kicking off with, it's breaking news for us. By the time you guys listen to the show, you probably might have heard this already, but it's a pretty major thing. Jake, what are you hearing?
Scoob, the Warner Brothers animated film with Zac Efron, I believe, has taken the Trolls route and has opted out of a theatrical release and instead will go straight to VOD, which I think is incredibly smart for a movie like that.
It's very smart, but again, that's just another film that's going against that NATO agreement, where so many studios are holding up to their end of the bargain, that unspoken agreement to maintain their theatrical window. The animated ones and the family-friendly ones seem to be skipping. So, we talk a lot about when everything gets back up to normal speed and blockbusters are competing for space at a multiplex, that it's indies that might suffer and it's mid-size or mid-budget movies that might suffer. It's starting to feel like family movies are content to become streaming options because, I'll tell you, it's super expensive for a family to go to a movie. So if you're giving them a chance to see something like this all together, yes, so it's Trolls, it's Scoob, Artemis Fowl, skipping its theatrical and going to Disney Plus. These are family movies, and it makes me wonder if we're going to see more family films go to streaming services instead of going to theaters.
I find it interesting the choices of which ones they are putting on VOD in this particular fashion, right? So Trolls and Scoob, I feel like are films that, again, this is just a feeling, but I don't think either of those were going to be gigantic box office films. I mean, again, I'm sure Trolls would have made good money. I'm sure Scoob would have made good money, but they weren't films. Like, you're not seeing Warner Brothers move Wonder Woman to VOD. You're not seeing them move Tenet to VOD. You're not seeing, just look at the choices they're making. I still am against the idea of this. I do not like the idea of a film going straight to VOD that was supposed to open on its theatrical date. I still think the movies deserve to have that theatrical experience. I think even something like Trolls probably would have been a fun theatrical experience for kids. I'm just thinking about, from a kid's standpoint, what you said is very interesting about the money and staying at home and watching them with a full family. But then you got to think about all those cool field trips that kids take on the weekends with their friends to go to a kids movie or whatever. Those were things that I loved doing as a kid. We're going to the movies with my friends in big groups as a kid. So I do not like these moves, particularly the Trolls move and the Scoob move on a personal level. I think they should be delaying them. I get from a business standpoint what they're doing. They're capitalizing on people being home, and I completely understand that. I get it. This all comes back to Jake and I's argument about logic and reality, right? This is the reality. We're adapting to the reality. This is a movie that serves and works better at home. And it's going to work like that way. You're not going to see Wonder Woman go that route. For me, it's kind of a weird thing. I feel like if you're putting your movie on that format, you're almost going like, it's whatever. Just put it there, see what happens.
Yeah, and you bring up a point that I never once even thought about, dude, but you're 100% right. You're training another generation of kids to not anticipate movies at the theater.
Young kids.
Young kids.
Yeah.
And they're already, let me tell you.
But it just depends on, because couldn't you say the same thing about Netflix? And the reason I say that is because when The Last Dance ended on Sunday, my first thought was like, God, I can't believe I have to wait a week for it to come. And it's because we've sort of been trained just by Netflix. But this will pass and this will be over and we will go back to the way things were. Because kids films sort of, the box office receipts on kids films for me fall under the umbrella of kind of faith-based films, where I always find myself surprised by how well they do.
Yeah.
Like a kid movie comes out and it opens to $60-70 million, and I go, oh my God, did that many people? And I go, yeah, kids. Kids wanted to go see it. So I think
families.
Families.
You're looking at about 3 people per trip to the movie, minimum.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I get it. And to Jake's point, though, I'm sorry, Jake, you're finishing your point. I'm sorry.
No, that was basically it. So I think we will go back to that because kids' movies at the theater are kind of like shooting fish in a barrel.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, I think it sets a dangerous precedent. I feel like, but at the end of the day, I understand it. Like when I reviewed Trolls on the air, I was like, listen, I get this. If you're a family and you have 5, 6, 7 people at home, that's a steal for $20 for 48 hours. Mm-hmm. It's a steal. So I get the adaptation process of what these movie studios are doing. My worry is that how obviously Universal started it. Now WB is following suit. How much further is this going to go? And once we do get back to normal, will these movies go to VOD like this still for certain titles? And I feel like that's a very dangerous precedent to set, in my opinion.
5 times is the number of times I've tried to get Brendan to watch Onward on Disney Plus. No interest.
But if you went to a theater, he would watch it. No. But that's a great point.
I gotta be honest. You look at the opening box office. It didn't really seem like many people wanted to go see it anyway.
But Onward is kind of a weird example because it wasn't that great. But I think the idea of a movie being in your home gives you the ability to say, "Oh, I'll push it off and get to it whenever I can." Sure. There's something about that appointment timing that gets you out of the house, that gets you into a social situation, that gets you into a theater where concessionists are working, they're making money. I mean, I don't want that to go away. I want that to still be an option. And we've discussed this before. Jake, you bring up Netflix. Netflix to me is a different situation because Netflix is its own thing, right? They're still trying to put things theatrically. The major theater chains aren't working with them on that. So Netflix has kind of their own branding. They're making movies for Netflix that go to Netflix. Some of them go theatrical. But these films, Trolls and Scoob, were theatrical films designed for the theatrical experience and designed to have big crowds. And I think the picking and choosing of certain ones that might not do great in box office, again, it's an opinion, to go to VOD is a little disservice to that. And again, I'm not the studios. If you're listening, I get what you're doing. It's a business decision that is absolutely brilliant because you're going to make a ton of money off of it. I completely get it. I just don't like the precedent it sets for future. That's all.
All right, Kevin, let's talk about Tenet.
Really? What's Tenet?
I just wanted to give Gabe a heart attack. We got very specific don't talk about Tenet instructions this week.
Some important appointments, say that 10 times fast, have moved back even further. I want to run through them very quickly. The Batman, Matt Reeves' film with Robert Pattinson, was going to come out June 25th. 2021. It is now October 1st, 2021. So most of these are affected because productions are currently shut down. So these movies they'd have to race to hit their release dates. They're just not going to happen. Shazam 2, scheduled for April 1st, 2021. That is now going to be November 4th, 2021. The Flash, which we know Andy Muschietti was working on because we bumped into him while we were in London.
Yeah, we did.
Has gone from July 1st, 2022 to now June 2nd of 2022. That's kind of interesting. That moved forward by a month and probably is reflected the fact that Muschietti is working on it. So he's could be scripting it right now or fine-tuning that, but they haven't started shooting that yet. Right before we started recording, it was announced that In the Heights, the adaptation of the Broadway musical, has been moved back a full year to summer 2021. Kevin said he was talking to John Chu, and John Chu told him it wasn't even finished yet. So
yeah, he said they were almost done with it, but I mean, it wasn't finished, and I was just trying to get his opinion on it. But because I have this theory that a lot of these, not theory, I just have a thought that a lot of these movies that are being pushed aren't done. Like, I mean, the post-production, we know that James Gunn obviously is in a different situation where he like move his films into an edit studio before everything happened, and he's able
Mike
to...
Flanagan just said on Twitter he did the same. It's interesting how many, to your point, how many filmmakers kind of saw what was coming and made a point to bring in all of the tools to their home. Like Mike Flanagan, someone asked him if the second season of Hill House was going to be delayed, and he said no, because I have all of the editing and post-production equipment in my home, and I'm just working on it now.
Do you know who's doing it? Guys who came up through the indie system who cut all their stuff themselves.
Point.
Yeah, all those guys. Like Spielberg. I mean, as much as we love him, he would not probably be able to edit a movie in his home because he probably doesn't. He's not an editor.
How dare you?
No,
sir.
I'm being serious though. But Sean makes a really good point. Like there are I can't imagine
the James
Spielberg
Gunn's,
hovering
the
over
Mike Flanagans,
right?
Yeah.
Although when I did the interview for the Post, Carrie Coon of The Leftovers told me that they very quickly edited scenes on the set that day in a tent, so they were able to go in and see finished cut.
That's crazy.
Spielberg was rifling to get to an award season release date.
Crazy.
Then maybe Spielberg is like a brilliant editor.
He's not doing that with West Side Story.
Right.
I think that's too much of a big production. The Post is kind of like a play.
Like, I can see Edgar Wright at home editing Last Night in Soho. That just makes sense to me that he could be home doing that. Or, I mean, James Gunn...
not doing Dune.
I will say, though, that the idea of James Gunn being in his home editing a massive film like Suicide Squad does seem crazy to me, because that film is so big. But I guess this is an interesting question to ask. These filmmakers have a lot of time in their hands now. Nolan, obviously, with Tenet and James Gunn, all these different movies... Do you get worried that they're going to be at home so long that they might start thinking of the film differently? And if they have more time to sit at the edit bay and actually make decisions rather than rushing towards a deadline. And this is, I'll just speak for me personally. I'm the kind of, and Jake's the complete opposite. I'm the kind of person that works better towards deadlines. I get the most creative in my mind when I know I have a deadline to reach. So I like to work towards the end of a deadline rather than, I'll prepare far out, but I will not actually physically get to that work until I kind of reach that deadline, because it helps me prepare knowing I have that kind of rush to get to. But with some of these filmmakers, I wonder how their personalities are. If you're sitting home, do you start changing your movie based on what's happening? Think about it. If you're watching the news, and you see the story about the coronavirus and the emotions that are going on in the world, do you start shifting your story kind of because your mind is also altered based on what's happening?
They have to adhere to their script or their storyboards. I think they have to trust what they had out there. The only thing I could see is if Nolan was like, what if we went in reverse and then forward again, but then reverse one more time?
That sounds like an ambitious idea.
Then everyone applauded.
Hold on.
I'll ask one more question. We all saw Quiet Place 2 before everything happened. All three of us did. And we did an interview with John Krasinski, which we are obviously holding until September.
Oh my God, we haven't even aired the Krasinski interview yet.
Yeah, when that was the last time Jake, Sean, and I were actually physically together. And we had a great time.
Now Kevin and I hang out together all the time. We just don't invite Sean.
This is true. But I guess here's my question.
Oh, that joke made me feel so bad. I couldn't even get all the way through it without feeling bad.
Wait, I know your question. It's a good one.
Well, so Quiet Place Part 2 is post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Does Paramount and John Krasinski go in there and change any of it? Do they add a note?
You can't take out the post-apocalyptic aspect of a post-apocalyptic movie.
I know. My point is, so think about how raw we are right now, right? As a world, as a country, emotionally, where we are right now. September rolls around and that movie hits. It's kind of a weird thing to see empty streets, people not around. Again, I am not saying they're going to change it. I'm saying, do you think there was a thought process?
It feels apples and oranges to me. I remember when Collateral Damage, was that the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, came out after 9/11? It was about terrorism, and they pushed it back. But I don't think they cut anything out of it.
Here's the thing.
They killed the Spider-Man teaser trailer. That's the only thing I can remember.
If The Mist was coming out, I'd feel a little bit more cautious about releasing The Mist. That feels a little more in tune. The Krasinski one, because I'm thinking about scenes that happen in the movie, doesn't feel like it's going to coincide with what we're dealing with. But I get it. You're making an excellent point.
I mean, like, Paramount clearly moves it to September, but I just wonder, like, if theaters don't reopen till mid-July or August, is that a kind of movie people... Like, that? Here's the real question. I know Gabe's saying to move on. Here's the real question.
Kev says mid-July because he's thinking of 7/17.
Paramount Pictures. I'm not saying the movie has to change, but Paramount Pictures, do they decide this is not the right time to put a movie out like this after this happens?
They could do that. Sure.
They could do that.
They could always do that.
How do you market it? Like with empty streets and stuff. It's weird.
We will find out. A lot of Emily Blunt. I'd put Emily Blunt in front of every trailer and a ton of interviews.
Whether she's in the movie or not.
Don't cut these, Gabe. I want to bring them up. Okay, we have a new headline or a new title for Venom, which is also moving. Venom was coming in October of this year, but shortly after Morbius moved back to March of 2021, Venom has also jumped from October to June of June 26th, I believe it is, 2021. It is now going to be called, and I kid you not, Venom, Let There Be Carnage. And for some reason, I think about Let's Be Cops. Like, that's the first thing that jumps to mind, that Jake Johnson movie that they made from a while back. I don't know. And here's the only thing that I find interesting about the Venom sequel. That means that the MCU Spider-Man movie that was due to come out in July 16th of 2021 is absolutely going to move.
Have they even started shooting it yet?
Well, no, they haven't. They were going to shortly before all of this shut down, which makes me think they have a script because they were about to head into production. But if the Venom film is moving to June of 2021, there's no way Spider-Man comes out in July 2021. We already know that it's Tom Hardy and Woody Harrelson. We know that Andy Serkis is directing it. Now, because they did pick a date that's after Morbius, I wonder if some stuff happens in Morbius that sets up the Venom movie as Sony tries to connect those worlds even more. But we're now getting to the point where films that were supposed to be coming this year are now pushing back to even more than a year away from now. So it's the further wrinkle of the release date schedule. And
which finally, is what we were saying earlier. It's not going to be like we're getting a bunch of great movies next year. It's just that everything's shifting. Like it's going to be 2 years before we get another Mission Impossible. It's going to be 2 years before we get another Jurassic Park. Like all those movies we were supposed to get next year, we're going to get in 2022.
I'm still a little worried about December, to be honest. Like it's too stacked. It's too much going on. There are too many movies coming out. I mean, I know December is always a big month, but there are massive films dropping week by week by week. And I don't know how the theaters are going to keep up with IMAX theaters and different theater chains. I mean, you got Dune and Top Gun coming out around the same time. I just don't understand. I don't think Top Gun 2. I don't think Dune's going to happen in December. I really don't.
This year is not settled yet.
I just don't think it will. I want to see Dune, and Gabe's flicking me off, but listen, I am all in on Denis, man. I am all in, and I want it to happen. I just can't see. Is Dune even done? How are they going to finish it?
I'm more fascinated in what the Oscar season is going to be. I honestly don't know, because, I mean, Venice says they're going on, and I have no clue how. Italy is in worse shape than almost any place.
When is the Venice Film Festival?
Yeah, but for the longest time, the Cannes Film Festival said that they were going on, and look what happened with that.
I talked to a friend of mine today about Toronto, about whether Toronto is going to happen or not, because Toronto hasn't yet postponed.
Right.
Try to imagine going into one of those venues in Toronto.
No.
If they maintained a social distancing, like try to imagine going into the Roy Thompson Hall.
Those things are clusters.
Under the guise of social distancing.
No, I mean, for people who are listening to our show who don't know what this place is, it's a gigantic theater with a balcony that fills hundreds and hundreds of people. It's where I saw Joker. It's where we saw a lot of films at TIFF last year. Right. Like, that's an interesting visual, Sean. Like, that theater is packed. You can't even walk through the streets of Toronto during the festival.
My point being, in a normal situation when you're just lining up to get into the second show of the night, it wraps around the block so many times that you don't even know where the line begins or ends. And now everyone's going to have to... They can't. For logistical reasons, they cannot return to normal in situations like that. So.
We were talking to somebody today about this, and like the idea of like these movie studios with these hundreds of millions of dollar films... You can't. That's the other part about it. They're not going to release these movies if theaters are only at half capacity. Yeah. They can't film.
I feel like I've said that for the last 3 weeks, and now the Rousseaus say it, and they're like, "You're absolutely right," because Anthony Rousseau said it.
Jake, I actually always said you were logically correct. I just said that I was more hopeful on it. That's all.
Also,
Tenet.
Jake just mentioned who our secret guest is. Nice job,
shit.
Jake.
That's fine. We already did it.
Let's get to our final news of the day. There's a new Hunger Games prequel movie coming out. No release date yet, but the cast, but the director, Francis Lawrence, is going to be coming back to the Hunger Games franchise. He'll be directing a prequel that is about, I keep wanting to say Professor Snow, but it's not Professor Snow. What's that guy's name? King Snow?
President Snow?
President Snow. That's right.
I have a flower from him right here.
I see that. Very nice. Good visual.
So we were having a weird, not a weird debate, but we were talking about it before we started recording, and I said, isn't that a weird plot for a movie? Because basically you're making a movie about a fascist when he was a child. And not to like throw out extreme comparisons, but like you would never make, I mean, this is a fascist character who has no problem killing large numbers of people to progress his government ideals. And I was like, you wouldn't make a movie about like a young Hitler, but you made the comparison to like there were movies about a young Darth Vader.
Yes.
Which then sort of made me go, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But and I can't remember how, like, because I wasn't a massive fan of the Hunger Games movies. Like, at least with Darth Vader, like, he had a redemption, and so we've ended up seeing good in him. We don't end up seeing good in Snow, dude. Like, he's just a horrible person, right? So I still don't feel like it's quite the same. It's not like with the prequels for Star Wars, it was this tragedy of this young man who was good and fell to darkness but was able to come out of it. With this movie, it's basically like, here's this really horrible murderer. He was a kid once, and here, look at all these things that happened to him.
To Jake's point and to Sean's point mutually, basically Vader is way more famous than Snow, and Vader was a much more interesting backstory. I don't know that you could tell people, oh, you want to watch a President Snow prequel? I mean, if someone said you want to watch a Vader prequel, I'd be like, yeah, of course I will. I mean, Attack the Clones happened. Oh God!
Did you guys hear what they might call this prequel? Though?
Don't, Sean.
I hear the working title of it is Sleet.
Wait, I don't get it.
Before the snow.
Oh, snow! That's really good. President Sleet. That's a really good one.
I was going to go with flurries.
And then the sequel to it's going to be called Hail. And it'll get worse and worse.
And worse as it goes. Yeah. All right, listen.
I will say this about Hunger Games, because Francis Lawrence is returning. And I want to give him a shout out because I think he's a great director. Phenomenal director, actually. And I think Red Sparrow was a very underrated movie if you haven't seen it.
Good.
It's very good. There's a moment that I wanted to mention when I saw Catching Fire. I think Catching Fire, my wife Lauren and I will agree, it's such an underrated movie. It's a great film.
Is that the second one?
It's the second one.
That's the one on the island.
It's the one where Francis took over. Francis took over directing, and then he did. I think Catching Fire is like this movie that exists in this major franchise that is an underrated gem of a film. And so much so, one of the things I loved about it, if you got the chance to see it in IMAX, he did this really cool thing when Jennifer Lawrence's character is entering the games and she's being lifted up into the world of the games.
Yeah.
He shot everything in the Hunger Games in 65 millimeter IMAX, the same cameras Nolan uses for his IMAX shots, and the rest of it was shot in the regular widescreen format. So as the movie goes and you see Jennifer Lawrence being lifted up, you actually see the aspect ratio on your screen go like this, and the entire image blows up. I just thought it was a clever idea. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I feel like that name, Francis Lawrence, being attached to this title makes me excited. We were discussing earlier about Andy Serkis being the director of Venom 2 being the reason why I was excited about it. I don't necessarily care about watching a President Snow prequel, but with Francis Lawrence directing it, I feel like if he's doing it, it's going to have some power to it. I think he's a great director who just happens to work really well in franchises. What else did he did? I Am Legend, which is a very good movie. What else did Francis Lawrence do?
I love the first half. Like, that's such an... Like, I'm so conflicted about that movie. I love the first half of that movie so much. Can't watch the dog dying. That's always tough. But
could you imagine...
It divulges into this, like, special effects, bad CGI extravaganza.
Yeah.
It's such a...
I've only seen it one time. I hardly remember it.
It starts so great.
Also, think about I Am Legend coming out today. Those trailers of empty New York City.
When he's walking through Times Square and you see the Batman Superman thing in poster.
That honestly, that feels like the type of movie where if it was coming up for a September release, they would just say nah.
Yeah, because that's virus based as opposed to A Quiet Place is aliens.
Yeah. Yes. All right. So we talked a little while ago when we had Chris Ray on, and also when we had Michael Shannon on, that the South by Southwest Film Festival, which was supposed to be held in March of this year, obviously got canceled, and a lot of filmmakers were scrambling to figure out what they were going to do next. Some of them are still figuring out their VOD distribution. Some of them are holding out for theatrical windows. We want to point out that the Prime Video Presents series, where Prime Video, Amazon Prime said they're going to showcase a lot of their films, is about to launch. It's going to launch on April 27th. So people who have Amazon Prime Video will be able to watch some of the titles for the filmmakers that agreed to participate in the Prime Video Presents South by Southwest 2020. So circle April 27th as an opportunity for you to see some new films coming. Also wanted to bring up this interesting story with Neon, the studio behind Parasite, and I, Tonya recently. They have a new documentary called Spaceship Earth, and we were reading about it before the show started. It played at Sundance, and it followed these people who allowed themselves to be contained in a biosphere for 2 years.
Like Biodome.
Kind of like Biodome, yes, with less Pauly Shore, so probably not as good.
Some Pauly Shore.
I like Biodome.
So do
There's nothing wrong with it. No, there's nothing wrong with it at all. But this is not it. This is Spaceship Earth, and they're going to show...
To get us off of
I'm trying to keep us on track here. Neon is going to allow it to be distributed. They're really playing around with how that they distribute this, and we found this to be really interesting. They're going to use some drive-in theater movie screens to allow people to sort of see it and still practice social distancing. They're going to set up pop-up projections in select markets so that you'll be able to watch this documentary on a screen that gets put up. There will be on-demand outlets also. They're also going to let places like independent movie theaters, museums, bookstores, nonprofits, some restaurants, they're going to be able to rent the film essentially at a $4 cost, a really cheap cost, not the $20 rental that you would get, but $4, and it's going to help businesses that have been severely impacted by all of these economic restrictions lately.
Love that.
So kudos to Neon for figuring out, not only a way to get a movie like this in front of more eyeballs, something that did well at Sundance, but to also figure out a way to use those funds to help some of the businesses in some of these markets to get some revenue back. They're going to take all of the rental proceeds and put them to the location that works as the theater for it. And Gabe is texting me something, so I will say they are letting them offer it for rent in their sites. Yeah, so essentially like a restaurant would allow, like the restaurant would rent it, right?
Yeah.
And then,
cool.
Or the restaurant would let people rent it at their site?
This is going well.
At the site. Yes, got it. Okay, very much so.
Listen, we're all, we're adapting just like everybody else is. So I actually... hope Gabe keeps this in, because this is all new information that came out today. So
yes. So anyway, look up Spaceship Earth. Search Neon's Spaceship Earth. Find out if it's going to be playing at a place near you, and if you want to support a local business while also checking out a cool documentary that you haven't yet seen that does not have Brendan Fraser in Biodome.
No, it was Pauly Shore and Stephen Baldwin.
One of the Baldwin brothers, yeah.
Stephen Baldwin.
Yeah.
Stephen Baldwin. That's right.
And also,
what was Brendan Fraser in?
Brendan Fraser was Encino Man.
Encino Man.
That's right.
Yes.
I kind of get those two mixed up.
I love
Encino Man would be a great commentary movie to do.
Yeah?
I love Encino Man. That's one of my favorite. Oh my God. I love
I
that
swear
movie.
to God, if that's our first ReelBlend commentary, I'm going to be sick that day.
Are we going to do the ReelBlend commentary?
Not if it's Encino Man.
My pick won. Gabe is giving
you
the thumbs
you
up.
won. You did Social Network.
I know, and I want to do the commentary for it.
By the way, I went down a gigantic Fincher rabbit hole this week and last week. Social Network is one of the greatest movies I have ever seen in my entire life, and it is.
It was my number one of the decade.
Kevin, are you ready for this? Fincher's better than Nolan.
That's not true, though. I mean, that's okay. It's just not true.
I like more Fincher movies than I like Nolan movies.
It's interesting. Fincher is. I mean, I would put Fincher and Nolan in the same level, but I think Nolan's a better filmmaker.
I'd put them in the same.
Yeah. Gone Girl, by the way, is
Jake
one
is
of
thinking.
Fincher's masterpieces too.
It's terrific. Jake is thinking.
I'm trying to think who I get more excited about when they have a movie coming out, and I think I got to go with Nolan.
Yes.
Hey Jake, you know there's a movie coming out in July called Tenet.
July 17th.
Look.
All right, this week in streaming.
I was asked not to get into it about Tenet with you.
We want to bring up the fact that there's a comedy show coming to Netflix on April 21st called Middletich and Schwartz.
Sean, is there someone that's involved with that was recently on ReelBlend?
I'm glad you asked that, Jake. That's a really great transition for us to point out the fact that Ben Schwartz joined us for the ReelBlend podcast for a bonus episode where we talked Sonic, primarily, but also used it as an excuse to just ramble through all of his experiences in Hollywood. He's had a number of really great stories, obviously from Parks and Rec and a lot of the improv stuff that he does. And this is why I'm pointing out this Netflix special to you, because it sounds really, really interesting the way that they shot this. I'm really curious to see how it turns out. But after you check that out on Netflix on April 21st, do go back and listen to our 90-minute conversation with Ben Schwartz, because it was really fun.
Yeah, he was amazing. And what I love about this special they put on Netflix, I haven't seen it yet, but it's 3 hours of completely improv material. So apparently it has like mess ups and all these things in it. I'm super excited to see it. I also, this is not in the show notes, but I just want to briefly say that Jake and I and Sean have all watched The Last Dance. And I know it's not a movie thing, but I just wanted to mention how cinematic this show is and how it's playing like a film. And if I'm not a sports person, but I'll tell you right now, I was so riveted. I didn't know anything about this particular story. It's called The Last Dance, Michael Jordan, Bulls documentary about the final season with the Bulls, the dream team, Pippen, everybody. I'm telling you right now, if you find yourself to not be a sports fan like me, and you sit down and watch it, you're going to be as engaged as you would about any movie you watch. It is phenomenal storytelling.
I mean, even if you're a sports fan, but maybe like didn't grow up with because I mean, I live in Chicago now, so like people here are just going nuts over this thing. But I grew up, I was a kid in Houston. I was a Rockets fan when Jordan was in his prime, and in the 2 years that he left, those were the 2 years that the Rockets won back-to-back champion. I mean, he came back for the tail end of the second. Anyway, but so like in theory, like Jordan should be like my enemy, right? Like the Bulls should be my enemy. But that is a fascinating, so well put, and it falls under the same umbrella of what we say about sports movies all the time, which is that you shouldn't have to be a sports fan to enjoy it. It's so well constructed.
Truthfully, the best 30 for 30s, and is this a 30 for 30, or is this just its own thing?
It's an ESPN documentary. It's not 30 for 30, but there are some truly great. You Don't Know Bo, the June 14th, 1994, the OJ one.
Well, and the best ones don't really. You don't have to like sports.
No, it's the drama. It's the drama. And for people listening to our show internationally, I know we have a lot of audiences who listen to our show internationally. What they're doing is they're putting it on ESPN every Sunday for the next 4 weeks, 2 episodes a night, and then 5 hours later they upload it to Netflix International. So
interesting. I didn't know
at the beginning of the show, it says ESPN and Netflix presents. So the international markets, I'll double check that, but it goes up in 5 hours later after it airs. So people who can watch it internationally, but it is truly remarkable. There's a moment where Ewing and Jordan were commentating on this UNC game from '82, where Jordan made his won the game in his freshman year in that final shot. And just hearing those two comment, and then Larry Bird later talking about the Bulls losing to the Celtics in the '86 championship, but that he saw God playing on the court.
He said that wasn't Michael Jordan on the court. That was God dressed as Michael Jordan. To me, that was the quote of the night.
What I love about those stories too, when you hear, and Kevin, you mentioned the Ewing Jordan one from it's Georgetown versus UNC, which it's Jordan's first game winner from UNC in a championship game.
Yeah.
When we talk about the three of us as nerds, like certain movie experiences that we've had, we can almost dictate, to the moment, like what theater we saw specific movie in, where we sat, what we had. But when I hear Patrick Ewing, where he's like, the two defenders came over to this side. They had blocked off one guy, so this guy was over here. He rolled off the pick. Jordan was free off the... This is like 40 years ago, and they remember the final play exactly where they were. And you then cut to Jordan, and Jordan's like, nobody knew I was open. They had no idea I was going to take that shot. And I was like, how do you remember those? But if you put it in the context of what we do, we have those exact same memories.
We could tell like junket stories. I mean, I will probably forever remember Kevin and myself being nervous to go in for Harrison Ford for Call of the Wild, and me like walking out and Kevin walking in, and we had like a silent signal where I kind of gave him like, dude, it's the okay, have fun, get a picture, like enjoy, kind of like. I will forever remember that little. Like I remember Kevin was on my right and I was on the left. Like it's those moments.
I'll never forget Joaquin leaving the room.
Oh yes,
turning around. And saying,
I say we had fun?
We had fun.
The only reason I bring up The Last Dance on our movie podcast is because I saw a tweet after the show ended, and I know we have to move on, but I saw a tweet when the show ended that someone said that even though I knew what was going to happen when that second episode ended, I was wondering were they going to trade Scottie Pippen. Oh. Like we know the story.
Yeah.
I did not know that Pippen was underappreciated. I didn't know he was the 122nd
I didn't know that.
highest
I didn't know that he
player.
was the 6th on the Bulls.
Unbelievable. So what blows my mind about the documentary is, and the reason I bring up that tweet is because the show plays like a movie. Jerry Krause is the villain, and there's so many ways to look at it. It plays out like a story you would watch on. It's unbelievable that a guy would actually have the audacity to want to get rid of Phil Jackson and get rid of these players after they won 5 championships, and just the idea of that going on behind the scenes. And what they were able to achieve with that bull-s happening behind the scenes is just insane to me.
I also
Unbelievable.
can't emphasize to you guys how hated that team was. That team was hated.
Them or the Pistons.
Oh no! Everyone hated the Bulls. Everyone hated the Bulls because they were so good.
But the bad boys of Detroit, like weren't they?
And that's going to be episode 3, right, Jake? Where they're going to show Jordan getting beat up.
Yeah, because Rodman was with Detroit, and once again, that's another great 30 for 30 if you get the chance. It's called Bad Boys of Detroit. They were pretty hated too, but maybe it's just because they didn't win as often as they won big, but they didn't win like the Bulls won.
They always ran into the Bulls.
How crazy was it hearing Michael Jordan's mom read that letter about him having $20 in his bank account?
Now, do you guys think that they're going to get into the death of Jordan's father?
Oh, yeah. I think they have to.
They have to.
What year did his father pass away?
94
or 3.
Oh, was it
so it's before this 97-98 championship season.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but they're using this last season as like a structure to go back and tell his story. But the story of the murder of his father is it's very interesting, and
it's unsolved.
Like Country Road in North Carolina, wasn't it?
It's solved in the sense that like there are, I think, correct me if I was reading a Tribune article about it the other day. Like there are police reports that say here is what happened, but it was handled in such a way where people should have asked more questions.
The gambling thing was a big question too, right? That was
that's going to be a whole. That's going to be a whole. Yeah. There's so much. I mean, someone asked me like, did this need to be 10 episodes? And at first I went, well, I don't know. They just need to cover. And then I started listing all the things they had to cover, and I go, yeah, I think it needed to be 10 episodes.
Cool.
Anyway, so just to go show you, you have no clue what you're going to get when you press play on an episode of ReelBlend.
Hey, it's a great show.
We've been all over the place today, including The Willoughbys, coming to Netflix on April 22nd. Who's seen it?
I've seen the trailer, and I did the interviews with the cast.
Hey, how was that?
It's here's what I'll say. Based on the trailer, it has a very cool, like, dark, Lemony Snicket vibe to it. So it's basically these kids live with their parents, and the parents are kind of assholes, and so they're trying to figure out how to get rid of their parents so that they could, like, live by themselves. And so they send their parents on a vacation so that they, like, devise this vacation so that something bad can happen to them. Okay. It's animated, but it's got a really cool all-star cast. And you know, we've been doing these sort of Zoom at-home junkets, so I got to talk to them yesterday. Will Forte, Maya Rudolph, and Terry Crews.
Did you mention MacGruber?
I didn't mention MacGruber. I did not. I actually do like MacGruber. I do.
What's that thing he says? The upper decker. Wait, I don't know if you remember that movie.
So anyway, yeah, it's sort of Lemony Snicket, kind of like a little bit of a darker edge to it. So yeah, I you know, it's for kids.
All right, I want to mention that Extraction is also coming to theaters. I know we can't talk about it; it's under embargo until a little bit later this week. What we can tell you is that it stars Chris Hemsworth. Directed by one of the guys who worked in stunts with the Russos,
Sam Hargrave. Yeah, and right, he was the new Asgard truck driver in Endgame. He was in.
Oh, was he really?
Sam Hargrave actually is
awesome.
Essentially the David Leitch or the Chad Stahelski of the MCU. Like he's a stunt guy. That's why all the stunts in Extraction from the trailers you guys have all seen are pretty intricate. But yeah, he's like been with the Russos in the MCU for a long time. So it's like they gave him this, they gave him a chance to do this based on his work. And I think Stahelski and David Leitch are two guys who completely understand action, which is why John Wick looks so good, because they understand and come from that stunt background. So that's why Extraction, it should be interesting to people if you're a fan of like the John Wick films, because it's a stunt coordinator, it's a stunt guy like Leitch and Stahelski, who is now directing. David Leitch was Brad Pitt's stunt double in Fight Club. It's very cool to see these guys transition into filmmaking. And Extraction is an adaptation of a graphic novel called Ciudad that Joe Russo and Anthony worked on together. They worked on the story, and then Chris Hemsworth is bringing that character to life. I can let you guys know that because we had Alicia Silverstone and Joey Pants this week, we pushed back our celebrity interview with, as Jake mentioned, Joe and Anthony Russo.
Was I really the first person that mentioned it on the show?
Yes,
I could have sworn 100%. That we...
Nope, no one mentioned it at all. It was Jake who mentioned that Joe and Anthony Russo will be making their triumphant return to the ReelBlend podcast, and anytime we get an opportunity to sit down and geek out with them, it is a highlight. So look for that episode dropping next week. That brings us to the blend game for this week, and we are playing #BestPictureBlend, which means of all the films, if you collected them all and put them into one category and listed all of the movies that have won Best Picture over the years, you have to pick which one of those would be your favorite movie. And what I realized while doing the research for this particular blend game is that there were far more movies that I love that didn't win.
See, that's what I texted Gabe, and I said, there really aren't that many Best Picture winners that I like. I would argue, at first I thought, oh, this is going to be hard, but it was really like maybe 6 or 7 movies that I would put under the into the folder of yeah, I love. Three for you? Yeah, I
had 3
this really wasn't that hard.
And there's a lot of them that I like, but I'm not going to necessarily put them at the top of a list of things that I love. And in fact, there's a ton of movies that I love that were runner-ups. And I know we've had, believe me, if you've listened to one episode of this podcast, you know that we are not the biggest fans of the Academy in terms of the things that they choose. There's a lot of times that movies that we really, really love end up coming in second or third place. So, Jake, of the 6 that you circled, which one did you fall on?
Look, I really did not want to choose this one because I feel like it's such a cliche answer. Mm-hmm. But there's no movie that won Best Picture that I love more than The Godfather. Okay. It goes into that folder of perfect films. it is a film that is kind of like structured how I handle certain real life situations. I feel like as a whole, and this is such like a cliche thing to say, but like I feel like men have structured their moral code on this movie. I think it is perfectly written, perfectly directed. Each performance is pitch perfect. It's got some of the greatest shots of all time. You could like if we were all together, all four of us, and you said like Jake, like knowing it's 3 hours long, Jake, like we're gonna turn on The Godfather right now. Do you want to watch it? I'd go, hell yeah! Like I would absolutely watch it in a heartbeat. And it's such like a cliche film fan answer. Like I love The Godfather. It's kind of up there with Citizen Kane. Like where sometimes I feel like people just say it because it's the thing that you say. In fact, I saw a poll one time that The Godfather is the movie most people lied about having seen. Which I thought was interesting. But I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, love The Godfather. And of all the movies that have won Best Picture, it's the movie that I love the most.
All right, I'm going to mention the movies that The Godfather beat that year. It won over Cabaret, Deliverance, The Emigrants, and Sounder. So yeah, clearly that year, I wouldn't have had a lot of problems with what took home Best Picture. My pick... of the three that I was going to choose from, I went with Titanic. And
interesting.
Yeah, I went with Titanic.
That was a weird sound I made.
It was a little strange. Titanic is the first movie that I went back to see as many times as Kevin will see a Nolan film. And I think I ended up seeing it 7 times.
Wow.
And it was the movie that I just kept bringing people back to because I needed them to see it on the big screen. Like every time I saw somebody new who hadn't seen it yet, I couldn't wait to bring them to the theater to go see it. And it kind of fascinated me of how it was 2 totally different films. Like it was like a great period romance with 2 charismatic, leads who had incredible chemistry together in the front half of it, and historical elements too of the Titanic and how great Cameron was with the details. And then the back half is a disaster film, and you're just as compelled in both of those situations. And it's only in years past as you get to find out more about it, like you start to learn the technical aspects about what Cameron put into it. But first and foremost, he's an amazing storyteller. Like he's just a brilliant, brilliant storyteller. And I felt that was the first time that a movie won that I felt vindicated by its win. I was so happy that movie won because I think at the time it was the highest grossing film. Mm-hmm. It had dominated the box office charts for years. That was the first. I used to get Entertainment Weekly and their box office chart was always in the back.
Yeah, I love that.
I remember going to the back of Entertainment Weekly every single week to still see Titanic up at the top.
Wasn't that a good year though? Like what did it? I know it beat LA Confidential. Did it beat The Insider?
Let me go see and through. So I mean, Titanic is still an incredible film.
Oh no! Honestly, I love Titanic, and one of the things that bothers me is this like newfound like whenever a movie gets really popular and all of a sudden it becomes cool to not like it. Right. It's like backlash where people try to say that like Titanic's not good. Yes, it is. Titanic is a great film, and also
Titanic's incredible.
One of the door thing, Bob, because like they establish in the movie that he can't get on the door. He tries to get on the door, and the door starts to, so this whole big question of, couldn't he get on the door? They establish that he can't. Like, there is a shot where he tries to get on the door, and they can't do it. So
I'll tell you also, there's one scene in it that's so incredible. You don't even really notice that it's doing it at the time, but there's a scene early on with super old Rose, and she's talking to the boat crew, and the boat crew is showing her a sketch of what would happen with the boat. Oh, it takes on this much water, and then it's going to go up there. But because the ass is so heavy, it's got to snap, right? And then that's where people are going to go. And you forget that. But then when you get to the end of the movie and it's doing all those things, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right. He mapped it out. Yeah. And so, and then we always throw a personal aspect to Titanic in it. It's my father. I've talked about my dad on the show. He didn't love going to the movies. He was cheap, notoriously cheap, and just didn't like paying for the movies. He didn't want to go to the theater. But we took him to see Titanic because I was like, you got to see this on the big screen. It's one of the best movies out there right now. And we went, and it's the scene where Rose and Jack are climbing onto the back of the very back of the boat, and the boat's going all the way under, and they're going to hold their breath. And literally, you see the two of them standing on the boat when it goes under, and it submerges, and it gets really quiet. And my dad looks over at me, and he goes, "Great movie," like as loud as he can say it. And that was like Ebert giving something 4 stars. Like he just didn't care for it at all. And
that had to be the greatest vindication for you as both a son and a movie fan. Like, all right.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, I was still like, dude, shut up. If you want to the movie, shut up.
You said you saw it 7 times. Do you remember, like, I remember when that movie was out for so long, at some theaters started doing intermissions, and you would, like, did you ever have an intermission moment with that movie?
I think I did. No, I don't think so.
Because I remember the AMC Patrick Henry, they would, like, after the movie had been out for a long time. Didn't it stay in theaters after it won Best Picture or something like that? I can't remember.
It was in theaters for months.
Right. And I remember, like, at some point, people had seen it so many times that the theater decided, okay, we'll go ahead and give you a break in between. And I remember remember, because Jake and I have discussed this before, I'll never forget going to Blockbuster because I pre-ordered the 2 VHS. Yes. And I remember it came with a gift card inside of it. And I remember going up to Blockbuster, riding my bike up there the day that the movie hit VHS, and I was so freaking excited to get it. And I'll never forget it because on the VHS case, in order to keep the 2 tapes inside the case, they had that like little sticker that you had to peel away, and then so always that
you have to be careful. You have to be so careful,
right? But it always stayed there. Like my VHS always had the remnants of that sticker.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that.
Here's. And I think we've talked about this before. Do you remember where it split?
I don't remember where it split, no.
Hold on. Yes, it was right after the hand and the steam, right?
No.
When did it split?
It's whenever they tell the captain that the boat's going to sink, and he goes, the boat can't sink. And he goes, it's made of steel. I assure you it can. And then Captain Smith looks at Ismay and says, I believe you may get your headlines, Mr. Ismay. And
really?
It cuts to black.
Do you think Cameron makes that decision?
Yes.
I think so too, because that's like if you were to split that like on HBO like over 2 nights, that would be the perfect place because that's right, but like it's just enough of like the boat's starting to sink where like shit's going down, but not enough so that like it interrupts the flow.
This might be a really interesting game to play at some point. We can call it like split blend, and we find a moment in a movie where we would actually put the split if it was 2 tapes, like where you would end the film in the middle to pick up. Because Cameron obviously had a thought process about it. He was like Jake just said, there's a reasoning why he split it there. He could have let it go another minute, could have let it go another 5 minutes, probably enough tape on there to do that.
Where did they split Heat?
I remember Heat was a two taper.
I don't think I saw Heat till it was on DVD.
Where did they split Meet Joe Black?
Oh shit, I couldn't tell you.
That was a 2 taper.
I didn't watch it enough times.
You know where they split Kill Bill? It's when they decided to make it 2 films.
Oh, there we go.
Kevin, what was your pick?
So my pick is actually interesting because a lot of the things you were saying are playing into kind of my thought process when I went through this game. So first of all, in Jake's pick, my first pick initially was Godfather Part 2. Because
I was wondering if you were going to pick that.
The only reason I was going to go with that movie is because I think Godfather 2 is the most. I think it's the most perfect film ever made. But I also feel like I love the story of it going up against The Conversation that year. The same director had his 2 films up for Best Picture.
Okay, let me pause you. Titanic went up against As Good as It Gets, The Full Monty, Good Will Hunting, and LA Confidential.
Ooh, good year. A good year.
All right,
that is stacked. Yeah. And then so to me that was an interesting one to look at, and I was also looking at other films, but the one I ultimately went with was is the reasoning that Sean was just giving about the personal idea was Return of the King, because it was the first time I ever felt excited about a Best Picture win in my lifetime. Probably one of the only times I've ever felt excited about a Best Picture win because. When Forrest Gump beat Pulp Fiction, I wasn't invested in those movies at the time. I was only, 12 years old. Return of the King was the first time I ever cried during an action scene because the action scene was so unbelievably epic that I just could not handle it. Like my brain had no way of understanding. It was the final battle, and there was a moment where like these elephant characters were sweeping people off their feet in this battle, and it was one of the most insane visual spectacles I had ever seen. I watched all 3 of them in theaters. I never read the books. I was never a Lord of the Rings fan. But Peter Jackson brought... Yeah, I know. But Peter Jackson... But Peter Jackson genuinely brought something to the table that I had never seen before. That trilogy was very special to me. And it was not... It was a trilogy that I'll never forget. It actually had more of an impact on me as a film fan than like films like Star Wars and things like that, because Lord of the Rings... I just never seen a filmmaker do what he did with that film. Also, I grew up, weirdly enough, in a time where one of my friends we were allowed to watch R-rated movies at his house, and his dad had Dead Alive on DVD or VHS or whatever it was, and that was a Peter Jackson film. I think it was called Brain Dead and other markers. Extremely violent zombie film. There's a scene where somebody takes a lawnmower, picks it up, and goes towards a bunch of zombies and just cuts them all up. It's pretty wild. But just to see the growth of that filmmaker, I was like, oh my god, the same filmmaker I watched when I was in 6th grade that did that zombie movie is now doing The Frighteners, which I loved, and then moving on to films like Return of the King, Lord of the Rings, Two Towers. Return of the King was arguably one of the most important moments I have ever had in the cinema. I remember sitting at AMC 24, that scene came on at the Return of the King, and my brain had no idea what to do except for just to cry, because I could not believe what I was watching. It wasn't because I was sad. I was just blown away by what I was experiencing. I'd never seen anything like it. So with that factored into the year, also Two Towers and Fellowship did not win, right? I think they were nominated each time. Was Jackson nominated each year?
I think so. Yeah.
And he didn't win till Return, right?
Correct. And Return was kind of a, let's give it to the trilogy, almost.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I am so against that mindset of like giving a movie an award just because, let's give Denzel Best Actor for Training Day because he probably deserved it for Malcolm X. You know what I mean? Like it's that like make good.
It happens a lot.
It does, but I do think Return of the King actually deserved to win Best Picture.
It's your favorite of the trilogy?
Hands down, on its own. Return of the King is a masterpiece, but I also love that particular story. So to see Return of the King win, to see Peter Jackson take that stage after all that work he'd put into it, after monumentally changing cinema with what he was doing with visual effects, that was hands down the best feeling I ever had watching an Oscars. That and Wally Pfister winning for Inception probably were two of my favorite highlights ever.
So Return of the King beat, and tell me if you still feel that it should win, Lost in Translation. Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
Yep.
Which is vastly overrated, by the way.
Yeah.
People don't talk enough about that film.
Overrated or underrated?
Underrated.
Oh.
Yeah. Is that Wolfgang Peterson? No.
Yes. Or Peter Weir.
Oh, maybe Peter Weir.
Wolfgang did another water movie.
It's Peter Weir. No, it's Peter Weir.
Okay.
Wolfgang Peterson did Poseidon? And something else, too. Mystic River was that year, and Seabiscuit was that year.
100% Return of the King.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Mystic River is a phenomenal film. I think it's the best thing Eastwood's ever touched as a director.
That won actor and supporting actor that year.
You know what I really wish is that Peter Jackson didn't do The Hobbit. I wish Del Toro did it.
Or if Peter Jackson had more time. I mean, one of the reasons that Lord of the Rings was as practical. I wish he had more time. I mean, he had like years to get prepped and to make all of like the creatures as practical. Obviously we're all a big fan of practicality on this podcast, to make them as practical as possible. I think because of what happened with Guillermo, they kind of just threw Jackson into The Hobbit. He didn't have time, which is why he relied so much more on CGI. And also, that's a 180-page book, dude. There's no reason that needed to be 3 different 3-hour films. Like, it didn't need to be.
That was business Hollywood at its best, right? That was like that. Yeah. That story did not need to be stretched.
They had to go to the index
to
pull more stuff out. They literally went to the index to pull out more shit.
Yeah. I'll tell you right now, though, like the visual effects that he achieved practically in the first Lord of the Rings trilogy was just the little things they did to create the height differences between the hobbits and everybody else. Like they would have them stand in like digging holes. They would dig holes, and the actor would stand in the hole. That way his height differential matched up to Ian McKellen when they looked up at Gandalf. And it's like the behind the scenes stuff is so wild. I mean, think about it like this. Think about when you see like the back of a cart or a back of a moving vehicle, I guess, what would you call those back then? But if you're looking at the back shot of Gandalf and a hobbit, Gandalf is towering. And I don't know how they did it unless they actually took out the seat for the actor and had the actor sit on the floor so his head was proportionate to the height of what Gandalf would look like. But those were all these little things that essentially Peter Jackson had to figure out from a practical standpoint, because necessity is the mother of invention, right? So how do you make this look as realistic as possible and play with some visual effects? I think The Hobbit suffered from, like Jake said, too much CGI. There's an idea of CGI being a tool in your paint box, and that's why Jurassic Park still looks better than all the Jurassic World movies. That's why Lord of the Rings looks better than the Hobbit films. It's because they took the time to find it practically and do it in camera and then blend whatever CG they could. Also, you have to give credit to the state of the art effects on motion capture. that was like really early on. I know Zemeckis messed with it early on as well, but Andy Serkis's motion capture on that film was incredible.
All right, we got to wrap because if you can see on the YouTube video, the sun is about to come in and mess around with my video because it's setting here in North Carolina. So let me go to audience picks. Kimberly Sue, she says Titanic. Disappointed Lion says Parasite. Parasite is your choice for favorite Best Picture winner. It just happened. That's like saying my favorite meal was the fried chicken I had last night. Like,
hey, don't knock fried chicken.
I'm not knocking fried chicken. I'm knocking Parasite. Aiden Erdahl says The Deer Hunter. Man alive, that's it.
Which, by the way, Deer Hunter is very similar to Titanic. Exactly what you mentioned about Titanic. Titanic, the first half of the film is like, the building up, the story, the love story. Deer Hunter, the first hour and a half of that film is like a wedding, it's normal life, and then they just drop you into that Vietnam.
That is a sentence I did not expect to hear.
I didn't either. I was waiting for that comparison.
Deer Hunter is a lot like Titanic. No, that should be the sentence that we use to promote this episode.
Instruction.
It makes sense. No, it makes a total sense. I get what you're saying.
It says West Side Story. Shelby Jones picks one of the ones that I was, and Clint Tomerlin both actually picked one of the ones I was going to go with, No Country for Old Men. Shelby Jones says No Country for Old Men. Blah, 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 blah. She says No Country for Old Men is nearly perfect, but Casablanca is actually her favorite pick. I'd still go with No Country for Old Men. So for next week,
I was talking to Gabe really quick. We were having a conversation, he and I, earlier about the difference between choosing our favorite movie that just so happened to win Best Picture and picking our favorite movie that we're what it says to have won Best Picture, and we're glad that it won Best Picture. And the only one that for me that was competing in that because of the realm of that would have been something like Silence of the Lambs, just because the fact that a horror movie about a cannibal won Best Picture over a year after it came out. I just love that a movie like that won Best Picture.
And its leading actor has less than 20 minutes of screen time that won Best
16 minutes.
16 minutes won Best Actor for 16 minutes on camera.
For next week, you can reach out on Twitter. And part of this is building off of the t-shirt initiative that we're doing. Again, thank you guys so much for participating in that. We're thanking you in advance for participating in our t-shirt initiative. We're going to play hashtag TheaterExperienceBlend. And I'm going to throw out a challenge to the boys. Let's try to come up with a story that we haven't told. Wait,
explain this. What does this mean?
So you would share with us what would be one of your favorite theater experiences, a movie theater experience that stands out as a memory to you. Now, I would argue that we've told a lot of really good stories.
I got to think about some stories.
So, and I even think we could say at the onset of this, okay, well, this one ranks really high. But if it's one you think of that you've told a lot of times, and Kevin, I'll use as an example, you going to the Endgame premiere. You've told that a lot of times. Jake, I'm trying to think of one that jumps to mind, but let's try to find some. We can even say them at the beginning, and say, well, clearly this one's important to me, but I'm going to try to find a really personal one, because I would argue that the three of us have hundreds of them, really good, memorable theater going experiences. So let's get creative. So hashtag TheaterExperienceBlend. If you guys want to play around with this one as listeners, use the email. Use ReelBlend@cinemablend.com and send us a paragraph. Give us a good explanation as to why this theater experience was important to you. And again, what I'm circling it back around to is how important being in a theater is to the host of this show, to the producer of this show, to the listeners of this show. We exist because of the theater going experience. And so let's keep the hashtag going for TheaterExperienceBlend and give us some really cool stories to read on the show next week. We get to a review. This one's coming from Tough Gong 2324, who calls this a must listen for fans of cinema and says the guys have a great knowledge and understanding of film, and their laid-back style is easy to listen to. They have had awesome interviews with actors, directors, and the people they interview seem to be genuinely enjoying the conversation with these guys, which is a testament to how down-to-earth they seem. In my top 5 of must-listen-to podcasts. Thanks a lot, guys, and keep up the great work with 2 huge thumbs up. So thank you very, very much. I would like to, as we say goodbye to you guys for another week, plug the t-shirt. Again, the link to that sale is going to be in the description of the YouTube video that you're potentially watching, or will be in the show notes for the podcast that you're potentially listening to. I will iterate once again that this is a limited sale going until May 8th, and that 100% of the proceeds are going to the Will Rogers Foundation, which goes to theater distributors distributors, not 100%. If you buy through the portion of that goes to produce the shirt is going to go to the people who are printing it. They're only going to print the shirts that are ordered, and then everything that goes outside of the cost of the shirt will go to Will Rogers, because we want to just do something special for people in the theater.
And we make no money off this at all.
Nothing. Nope. So we'll talk to you guys next week, where we're going to have the interview with Joe and Anthony Russo, talking about Extraction and all things fun Marvel.
I'm sorry I ruined it.
On social media, at Jake's Takes, at Kevin McCarthy TV, and at Sean_O'Connell. We'll talk to you guys soon. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy, and
Tenet